Today, we're going to talk about something that touches every single one of us at some point: grief. We're always told we need to move on. But what if that advice is actually the very thing that's holding us back? Let's dive into why that common phrase might be the real problem here.
Seriously, just think about it. The second we experience a huge loss, it feels like the world starts this quiet little countdown, nudging us to get back to normal. But what if that whole way of thinking is just flawed? What if the goal isn't to get over it, but to figure out how to live with it?
All right, let's start with that phrase we all know: moving on. Sounds simple, right? But it creates this hidden and honestly, this uncommon pressure. It makes grief sound like some kind of race we're all supposed to run and then just leave it in the dust. I mean, there's this unspoken script, isn't there? You get a few days of bereavement leave, a couple of weeks of sympathy, and then there's this expectation that you should be getting back to business. This pressure basically says that if you're still hurting, months or even years down the road, you're somehow failing at grieving. But the psychological reality? Oh, it's so much messier than that. So, to really understand why moving on can feel absolutely impossible, we have to look at what grief actually does to us. This is way more than just an emotion. It's like a seismic event that completely reshapes our entire inner world. Here's a really key idea to hang on to. Grief isn't just a feeling you have, it's a landscape you're suddenly living in. It's the sound of your mind working overtime trying to make sense of a world where a huge, fundamental piece is just gone. Your brain is literally rewiring itself to a new and very different reality. And you can see right here just how deep this goes. Suddenly, the world doesn't feel safe or predictable. Your actual brain chemistry is in flux, which is why grief brain, that foggy, forgetful feeling, is so incredibly common. Your identity can be shaken to its core, and the future you had all mapped out, it's just shattered. It's a full system shock. Now, for most people, the raw intensity of that shock does lessen over time. But what happens when it doesn't? Let's take a look at what's sometimes called prolonged grief, which is when that process of adapting to the loss just gets stalled. This chart makes a really important distinction. And let's be clear, this is not about judging anyone's pain. In both scenarios, the loss is felt so deeply. The difference is the trajectory. With common grief, there's a slow, gradual movement towards integrating the loss into your life. With prolonged grief, it's like the person stays anchored in that initial acute state of suffering. And this is a super crucial point to remember. There is no correct timeline for grief. None. Prolonged grief isn't about still being sad a year later. It's about the grief staying so all-consuming, so powerful, that it consistently stops you from finding a way forward and plugging back into life. So why does grief get stuck sometimes? Let's get into the really powerful psychological forces that can make it feel absolutely impossible to let go of that intense, raw pain. This quote, it just captures one of the biggest roadblocks perfectly. For so many, letting go of the pain feels like letting go of the person. The grief itself becomes the last tangible connection you have to the one you lost. And to move away from that grief feels like a betrayal, like a second abandonment. Another massive factor is something called identity loss. See, when we lose someone close, we don't just lose them, we lose the part of ourselves that existed only in relation to them. If you lose a partner, you're not a husband or a wife anymore. If you lose a child, your fundamental role as their parent is forever and painfully changed. And you can see here how this plays out. You lose your role, you lose your shared future, and you lose the person who held up a mirror to you, the one who really truly knew your stories. And that overwhelming question, who am I now? Well, it can keep a person stuck in the past, where their identity still felt whole and complete. And then, compounding all of this, you have the concept of secondary losses. I like to think of these as the aftershocks of the earthquake. The death itself is the primary loss, but it sets off this whole cascade of other losses that are often totally invisible to the outside world. So what this really means is that you're not just grieving a person. You might also be grieving your financial stability, your friend group, your daily routines, maybe even your sense of purpose or faith. Each and every one of those is a loss that has to be acknowledged and grieved all on its own. Okay, so if moving on is a myth, what's the alternative? Well, the whole conversation around grief is shifting towards a much more compassionate and realistic idea. moving forward with the loss, not just leaving it behind. This whole approach is about integration, not amputation. It means you accept that the scar of that loss will always be there, but you can build a new, meaningful life around it. It's about finding ways to continue your bond with the person who died, to carry their memory and their love with you as you start to forge a new path for yourself. And if there is one single thing to take away from all this, please let it be this. We have to stop treating grief like it's a disease that has a cure. It is a fundamental part of what it means to love. The goal isn't to erase the pain, but to learn how to carry it so that it doesn't break you. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. If this pressure to move on is so harmful, what can we do differently? How can we, in our communities, our workplaces, our own families, create a culture that gives grief the time, the space, and the compassion it truly, truly requires?